This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental. This story is purely fictional and does not promote or encourage any form of violence. The defenses were adequate, as long as nothing else changed. At least, the Vice Admiral could do something right. Defense had always been his strongest suit, so Tyler wondered about his new aspirations to launch an offensive. As the last speaker finished his summary, they broke for lunch. Tyler looked forward to the first speaker after lunch. The schedule indicated Marshal Trine of Military Intelligence would present the latest and greatest on enemy forces. Trine was definitely one of the Emperor's men, and had always worked closely with the Imperial intelligence community. That had traditionally served Admiral Oslu fine, since Trine had access to a lot of the same intelligence the Emperor did. Marshal Sliss had many of his own people within military intelligence, and that back channel typically provided more intelligence than was reported in forums such as this. They knew the Emperor loved to control all of the intelligence, so they constantly watched for misinformation. Power and control walked hand in hand with intelligence, but their network had been in place for years, and so far had never been compromised. Regardless of its timeliness or efficacy, Tyler was interested in seeing the latest. According to Marshal Sliss, the intelligence community had kept the latest news tight to their chest. That meant it was valuable. As prearranged, Tyler and the Admiral's staff met for lunch to debrief the morning information. The meeting was held in private conference rooms that were part of the Supreme Commander's suites. As usual, the kitchen staff provided a fabulous meal, served hot and quick. Lunch was 2 hours long, and they had much to cover in that short time frame. Marshal Sliss led the debriefing, assigning responsibility to lower staff members for many of the agenda USO 163 items. There were two major priorities they needed to move on: the readiness of new equipment certification and the supply chain problem. One of the staff members reported they'd already been contacted by Vice Admiral Thiessen's staff to resolve the supply chain problems. Tyler listened intently as the person reported the conversation. Officer Slaas was a very reliable and able member of Admiral Oslu's staff, and she dutifully reported the incident without embellishments. When finished, she waited patiently for questions and instructions. Marshal Sliss jumped in. "Okay, we have to work with them on this, but here is how it will go. I will talk with Marshal Situ to bring him in on our plan. At no time should anyone in the Vice Admiral's staff be in charge of any aspect of this issue. However, we will involve them as we dictate, creating an illusion they are in charge. Between us and Marshal Situ, we can force Thiessen's staff out of the picture by illuminating their ignorance." "But sir," Officer Slaas rebutted, "Vice Admiral Thiessen has a staff member who will surely be put on this, and he knows as much about our supply chain as anyone in this room." Realizing her mistake, she quickly backpedaled. "My apologies, Admiral, as much as any of us." Tyler gave her a reassuring smile and affirming nod. "Apology accepted, Officer Slaas." He scanned the room. "She is right, of course. I know the person she speaks of, and his knowledge is nearly as great as my own." He stood up and walked over to the buffet, selecting a wonderful fruit dessert he was partial to. Everyone waited patiently, looking for leadership to solve this problem. Tyler retook his seat and placed the dessert on the table. "All right, here is what we are going to do. The man on the Vice Admiral's staff is Officer Tulu Kier, and he was once the best supply officer I had in my 7th Fleet. We cannot show him up, therefore we must recruit him to our side. Officer Kier will know he cannot usurp responsibility for this operation from Marshal C2, but he will insist on a major piece of it." Officer Slaas looked worried. "But sir, how can we recruit him?" "You're not going to recruit him. I am. He let them think about that before continuing. Officer Slaas, I would like you to set up a meeting with him immediately. Tell him we are looking 164. Admiral's ghost forward to working with him, and that we want to discuss some details before we proceed. With Marshal C2. The Marshal chimed in. Okay, make it happen, Officer Slaas. Tyler looked at his staff confidently. He will be suspicious, but he will come. The Vice Admiral will insist upon it. However, they will not suspect that I will be the one meeting him. Let's keep this confidential. It is a small battle, but they all add up over time. Tyler was satisfied with how he handled that crisis. If only he knew how he would recruit the officer. Vice Admiral Thiessen had recruited Officer Keir with a promotion long ago. At the time, the 7th Fleet Commander had not seen fit to promote the ambitious officer, despite his brilliance with supply chain logistics. Admiral Oslu regretted the loss, but at the time, he'd been heavily occupied in multiple campaigns, so he rarely involved himself in such trivial matters. It wasn't trivial anymore. Funny how things came back to haunt you. Well, maybe he could salvage the situation. At the very least, he had to try. He made a mental note to discuss it with Marshal Sliss and Marshal C2. Their advice would be invaluable in dealing with the young officer. The rest of the debriefing ran smoothly, and Tyler left, feeling satisfied they made progress towards regaining power. Although they didn't really discuss the transition, rumor had it many on the staff were meeting resistance from Vice Admiral Thiessen's camp. It was never overt, but stalls and delay seemed to be the general tactics used. Unfortunately, Tyler knew time was not on their side. Once everyone returned from lunch, Marshal Treen wasted no time delivering his intelligence report. According to the latest intelligence, their failed attack had caused considerable damage to Krildon forces and created great concern among the population. According to estimates, the Krildon forces were 50% of pre-battle strength. Unfortunately, intelligence on their weapons production was sketchy at best, so they didn't really know how or when Krildon would rebuild their fleet. Tyler noted this last bit fed perfectly into the Vice Admiral's hands. They could easily justify an offensive action while the USO-165 enemy rebuilt. Although their own forces were depleted, Krildon knew this, and that gave Pulto an edge. The problem was the enemy would have adjusted their defenses, and Pulto's intelligence was still too sketchy. What if Krildon's supply chain was full before the attack? No one knew, therefore. Tyler sided with caution. Marshal Treen reported on various known assets, their locations, and defensive status. Watching through the Admiral's perspective, Tyler realized the enemy was ready for another assault, even though they might not expect it. As he finished, Marshal Treen shared a small bit of information he confided the intelligence community was not concerned about, although it was puzzling. Based on his information, they suspected another base was being constructed somewhere around their home world. This assumption was based on intelligence indicating an increase in shipments of a benign Krildon mineral called skrilt. The mineral was an additive for certain plastics and ceramics used in space construction. Before the war, even Pulto companies used the substance to build mining colonies, although the cost proved greater than comparable materials found on Pulto. Those wasteful companies had been fronts for the intelligence community in a rare insight into the possibility of war with Krildon. At the time, the companies tried to find military applications for the mineral, but never succeeded in creating anything other than prefab construction for space applications. According to Pulto's scientists, the best application was in creating materials for non-atmospheric environments. The substance, when combined with other materials, just didn't have sufficient strength for military applications. At the time, Rumors had circulated that Krillden was experimenting with the mineral as a catalyst in reactors. But Pulto chemists had discounted that application since the substance had such low reactive properties. To this day, Pulto intelligence had tracked the mineral's use, but only as an indicator of military base and depot construction. Marshal Treen ended his report and turned the proceedings back over to Vice Admiral Thiessen. For some reason, Tyler was concerned about the Skrilt. The Admiral's memories didn't support his anxiety, but something about the mineral shipments raised a red flag. 166 Admiral's ghost. He needed more information, but wasn't sure how to get it. He had to talk with Marshal Sliss to see if his resources could track down additional information about those Skrilt shipments. Marshal Treen reported Krillden shipped an enormous quantity of the material over the last year, so the natural assumption was new base construction. Perhaps that was all it would amount to, but Tyler wanted to make sure. If Krillden had found a way to use the mineral in reactors, then it might have been adapted to military ship propulsion. Tyler could envision a fleet twice as fast and needing half as much fuel. That alone would turn the tide of war in favor of Krillden. The Vice Admiral finished questioning Marshal Treen before announcing a 30-minute break. Tyler was relieved for the break, especially since the issue nagged at him and he wanted to consult with Marshal Sliss. Tyler leaned over to the Marshal as everyone filed out. "Let's chat about this intel report during the break. Bring Beelan and Corin." Marshal Sliss nodded and signaled the two officers to follow. They made their way down the corridor and found an empty conference room. Everyone took seats at the small table and turned towards Tyler. "Okay, Marshal, I need your quick response to the report and what you intend to do with the information." Tyler watched as Marshal Sliss took a minute to scroll through his portable tablet. "Using our best estimation, I would assume their numbers were off by nearly 10 to 15%. That's about normal for the intelligence branch. However, I do believe their assessment of the defensive capabilities were right on. I know how they gather that data, and it has remained reliable till now." He paused, waiting for Tyler to respond. "That was my basic assessment as well," Tyler agreed. "Why doesn't the Vice Admiral come to the same conclusions? He has the same experience we do, especially when it comes to defensive capabilities." The Marshal considered the question carefully. "Well, he may be blinded by the thought of becoming Supreme Commander and might move forward despite the data." The Marshal looked puzzled for a moment before revealing more. "Or maybe the Vice Admiral has better intelligence than we do. Considering his ties, USO 167, with the Emperor, he may receive all the information from the intelligence community rather than the spoonfuls we're fed." Tyler thought about the Marshal's summation, but something didn't add up. He had also considered the possibility the Vice Admiral was getting more intelligence than usual due to his newfound devotion to the Emperor. But the Vice Admiral could also be fed misinformation to ensure his support of the Emperor's objectives. Or they really could be sitting on information that indicated an offensive was warranted. Assuming they had this additional information, it would give them fuel to discredit the Admiral and garner support for another offensive that might actually succeed. Damn. Tyler knew accurate intelligence was an edge Vice Admiral Thiessen might have over Admiral Oslu's staff. They needed more, and they had to find a way to get it. "All right, Marshal. I'll admit that is a possibility. It could be how they plan to win this conflict and discredit me at the same time. I always wondered why they would move down such a risky path after our last defeat. It seems reckless, but I don't credit the Emperor with recklessness, regardless of my personal feelings about him." "True," the Marshal responded. "He has never acted reckless in the past. Perhaps they have seen a way to win this conflict, and they want you out of the way in the aftermath. Then, he would be a truly victorious emperor, with no one to threaten imperial power or popularity. Fine. Assume for the moment this was true, then why should we resist? Tyler asked, puzzled himself. If he has seriously found a way to attack our enemy and inflict heavy damage, why should we stop him? I am, after all, a true professional, and a victory is a victory, even if I didn't design it. I am not a politician, and the loss of power does not mean that much to me. The safety and success of Pulto, that is what I care about. The Marshal absorbed it with deep concern. Tyler was more than happy with the idea of retiring with Tusia to their estate and spending the rest of their lives enjoying each other. The Marshal, however, was military through and through, and wouldn't know what to do with himself if he were forced to retire. Tyler was certain the Marshal had never even entertained the notion before now. 168. Admiral's Ghost. Without the Admiral, the Marshal was out. He could vie for another position, but the Vice Admiral, if he became Supreme Commander, would hardly be generous to the man who had worked so hard against him. That was the way military politics went, and the Marshal knew it. I don't know, the Marshal said. At the surface it seemed reckless. Now, however, I'm not as certain as I had been. Perhaps we need to reconsider our position and reanalyze their plan. Tyler didn't like the uncertainty he had created in his top advisor. Time to lead him back. Not yet. It is only a theory at this point. One to consider, but not one to base our strategy on. Put a few people on analyzing the intelligence and the Vice Admiral's plan to cover ourselves. But let's not detract from the mission we started. Tyler watched as the Marshal's demeanor changed back to military duty. Now, Tyler wanted to change the subject. I noted the Skrilt shipments were included in the report, but they were downplayed pretty heavily. What to think, Marshal? Is it something we shouldn't worry about? I agree with Marshal Trine. I think Krilden is building more bases or supply depots. Tyler had hoped the Marshal would provide greater insight, but then they could be correct in their assessment. I can't put my finger on it, but something about this has me concerned. I realize our best resources have discounted the mineral as not having military applications, but with so much being produced, something large is underway. Well, we did do a lot of damage to many of their bases and installations. Perhaps this is for repairs and replacements. Tyler realized the Marshal was not overly concerned, but something nagged at the back of his mind. Perhaps, but why were the shipments started more than a year ago, before our last battle? That puzzled the Marshal, who was clearly thinking about it. Tyler kept pushing. He needed to explore this, and the Marshal was the only one who could get additional information. Krilden has had a long time to work with the material, longer than our experts. Perhaps they finally found a military application for it. After the war started, we lost our supply, so we never continued to pursue research. What if they found a way to USO-169, use it in new weaponry? Would you want to make an offensive move considering that possibility? No, I wouldn't. But our experts have discounted this possibility. Yes, but that does not make it so. It simply makes it less probable. Tyler looked at Beelan and Corin, both staring intently. Apparently this exchange was exciting enough to pull them from their devices. Officer Corin, what do you think of this information? Tyler asked. Officer Corin was caught off guard. He obviously wasn't expecting the Admiral to ask for his opinion. Tyler knew it was out of character, but he felt compelled to seek out others' thoughts on the subject. Well, sir, I must admit the quantities expressed in the report were considerable. As a communications officer, we get familiar with the size of supplies that move around the military, and those were much larger than I would expect for a base or depot. He paused to gather his thoughts. I am no expert on material chemistry, so I cannot give any advice on whether they have found a military application for the material. However, I can tell you that about a year ago, I read our own scientists found a military use for a substance that was a common byproduct of a certain food production. The details escape me, but the premise was that the discovery was significant to the war effort. Perhaps Krildon has made a similar breakthrough. They all sat quiet, contemplating what Officer Curran had said. Tyler knew fresh eyes could often help define a problem. Answers may not be given, but another way of looking at it could be invaluable in finding answers. Tyler noted Curran's comments had an effect on the Marshal. He stared at his tablet in deep thought before he began writing something forcefully. "Admiral," the Marshal started, "I think that perhaps your instincts may be on to something. I know we have often relied on our experts too heavily, and since they have not looked at this problem for many years, we should assume Krildon has found something valuable." "I agree, Marshal. Is there any way we can get more intelligence on this? How much pull do you have?" 170, Admiral's Ghost. "Enough, Admiral. I can put more than a few resources on it if we determine it deserves that priority." "No," Tyler cautioned. "Don't put too many on it. I don't want to raise suspicions. If they knew we were interested, they may simply pull the data away from your people. Keep it low-key, but make sure your people know it is a euphoric state priority." Tyler felt that was how the Admiral would have handled it. "Very well, sir. I'll get my people on it immediately." The Marshal began writing furiously. Tyler thought about his own resources. Perhaps Tuzia might have some idea on how to track down additional information. Intelligence was not her strong suit, but she had a lot of insight into the scientific community from years helping her father. He chaired the Committee on Science and Industry and had many connections they could use. "Very good, Marshal. Let's get back to the conference and see what else the Vice Admiral will share." Neither looked forward to the final speaker, Marshal Guri. He was a notoriously boring speaker who took his passion for analyzing enemy strategy far too seriously. You would think he was from Krildon, although Tyler knew the man had never been there. He was a bookworm who specialized in Krildon military history. Tyler understood the Marshal had some inherent value, but he also knew Admiral Oslu had far more insight into the enemy than this man ever would. He prepared himself for a long afternoon. After the lengthy first day of the conference, Tyler longed for a quiet evening with Tuzia. Unfortunately, the Emperor's Ball was a must-attend for the national hero. The Emperor often held such events, especially to coincide with things like the Admiral's return. Tyler was glad it wasn't designed just for him. Tuzia told him this particular event was created to provide the Supreme Council a forum to socialize with the Imperial Court. Everyone knew it was a political event, regardless of the harmless designation as a ball. Tuzia's father and mother would be there, and Tyler was nervous about meeting them. The Admiral's memories indicated USO 171. He had a great relationship with both, until the many years of separation from Tuzia soured them on his company. Tuzia admitted her mother was not happy with their rekindled relationship, and cautioned Tuzia against going to Tuland to see Tyler. In her mind, the Admiral losing power was just desserts. She wanted the Admiral to suffer for the mistreatment of her daughter. Tyler understood her attitude and dreaded the meeting. Tuzia's father, however, had always supported the Admiral, despite how his daughter had been treated. Always the politician, he probably wouldn't let family concerns interfere with the business of the state, at least not publicly. Privately, however, Tyler held no illusions. Tuzia had always been his favorite child. Everyone knew it, even her brothers and sisters. Tyler felt a great deal of anxiety at meeting the man, so he was happy it would be part of a public event. Tyler held his anxieties in check as their ground car emerged from one of the underground tunnels linking the military complex to the Emperor's palace. The gala was held in one of several large facilities designed specifically for these types of affairs. This particular location was 10 stories underground and would host all the political power on Pulto. Tyler wondered what Krildon would have done if they knew of the event and had access. The thought sent chills down his spine. The car pulled in line behind 4 others waiting to offload passengers. Tyler watched Tausia fidget, pulling out a mirror to check her appearance one final time. It was odd. She normally was at home at these affairs, having been raised on them since childhood. Tyler imagined she was nervous at meeting her parents now that she was back with her husband. Memories of Linda flooded Tyler as he recounted the one time he had met her parents. Tyler had sensed her parents hadn't liked him from the outset. His background and questionable direction for the future conflicted with their view of the proper man for their daughter. Linda downplayed the meeting at first, but later her family admitted their true feelings. Shortly after that, she had severed all contact with them. At the time, Tyler was happy with her familial disillusionment, but now he only felt guilty about it. He hoped after his death she had reunited with her family. The memory left Tyler feeling melancholy. 172. Admiral's Ghost. Their car finally pulled up to the carpeted entrance as one of the assistants opened their door. Thankfully, no press was permitted to this affair, and they made their way up the sweeping staircase peacefully. The Emperor rarely allowed press to his affairs, and the need for a security clearance to access underground palace levels ensured they didn't show up uninvited. Tyler ran through the Admiral's memories, preparing himself for the night's activities. He knew they would be announced. The Emperor would come last, and they would be required to mingle throughout the affair with political allies. The Marshal assured him the event would be an opportunity to strengthen existing ties and create new ones. Because of the ability to forge new relationships, many speculated why the Emperor sponsored these affairs. After all, not everyone sided with the Emperor, especially those on the Supreme Council. Tyler knew why the Emperor allowed it. It was the perfect opportunity to keep track of allegiances, new or otherwise. The place would swarm with spies, listening devices, and recording instruments. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Nearly everyone suspected this, so very little gossip was heard during these events. But to decipher relationships was enough to be valuable. After several hours of drinking, even tiny slips of the tongue could be analyzed for valuable information. The Emperor never missed an opportunity to spy on his subjects. Tausia squeezed Tyler's arm gently as they moved forward to be announced. They walked to the entrance of the ballroom, and Tyler was stunned at the enormous vista spread below them. The ornate crystal stairs widened as you descended, and the light refracting off the stairs was a dazzling rainbow of colors, displaying everyone in the best possible light. At the bottom, tables lined an enormous dance floor, stretching into the distance. At that far end, an orchestra played soft music as a backdrop for the multitude of conversations. No one sat at any of the tables, and most were clustered in small groups conversing throughout the room. It was difficult for Tyler to make out faces from his vantage, but he hoped recognition would come while they mingled. By his estimate, several thousand people were in attendance. He wondered how they could announce them all, but a quick dip into the Admiral's memories confirmed only senior officials and military personnel were announced. Yoso 173 on cue. The band stopped playing and a flare of horns rang out across the ballroom. Everyone turned to look at Tyler and Tusia, waiting at the top of the stairs. It was an amazing spectacle, and even the Admiral's memories couldn't quench the awe from the experience. Tyler had never seen anything like it, and for the first time, he began to sense the enormous power that was the Admiral. He watched the entire room grow silent as everyone awaited the announcement. To their right, one of the palace staff lifted a device to his mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor and gratitude that I may present to you Lady Tusia Slay and Admiral Naylan Oslu." The room erupted into a roar of applause that felt powerful enough to knock them down. Tyler felt self-conscious but noticed Tusia was cool as a cucumber, her earlier nervousness gone. She looked at home in this setting. Per protocol, they waited for the crowd to subside before descending the staircase. Tyler didn't want to start the grand affair with a social blunder, so he waited for Tusia to move. After several minutes, the applause subsided, and Tusia squeezed his arm gently to signal they could descend. Tusia waved casually to several people below as they made their way down the brilliant steps. Once on the floor, Tusia began the political introductions and reacquaintances in earnest. She had whispered to Tyler they could expect this to go on for at least another hour before the Emperor arrived. Since they were traditionally the second to last to be announced, only the Emperor remained. Tyler struggled to keep up with the names of everyone they spoke to and the intricate details of the political influence they possessed. He marveled that Tusia could keep up with it all, but knew the Admiral hadn't. Fortunately for Tyler, his new memory kept everything properly catalogued for future recall. He doubted he would need it all, but something might prove useful later. He was certain the Marshal would debrief him. Tyler was relieved they hadn't made it to Tusia's parents yet. One particularly nosy woman who seemed to thrive on these affairs had assured Tusia her parents were around. After she had left, Tusia informed Tyler that she worked for the Emperor's personal press office and knew everything about everything. She warned Tyler never to say anything around the woman. 174 Admiral's Ghost. Considering how offensive the woman was, he didn't think there was a chance of that happening. They mingled for an hour and made it only a quarter of the way around the room. Tyler was tired and ready to sit, but Tusia reminded him they had to wait until the Emperor arrived. She indicated their table was across the room near the Imperial table on the raised platform. Finally, after moving away from a member of the Supreme Council, the music stopped, and the brass signaled another announcement. To Tyler's relief, it was the Emperor. Typical of the Emperor, he wasn't regal. His attire was no better than Tyler's, except for the elaborate gold trim around the neck and down the sides. On the left side of his chest, he wore a simple insignia pin from the Imperial Palace. Even the working palace staff wore the same pin. Tyler gave him credit. He was not ostentatious. The only thing imperial was his focused and commanding gaze. When he looked at you, you saw power in his eyes. He took in every detail with his penetrating stare as he constantly analyzed, weighed, and judged. To his left, a beautiful woman held onto his arm. She was not the Empress, and according to reports, the Empress now lived on the other side of the planet at an imperial estate on an isolated island. Although not as immense as the Imperial Palace, Tusia had once stayed there at the request of the Empress. Her only comment was that it was decadent. This piqued Tyler's curiosity, but he didn't press for details. The woman hanging on the Emperor's arm was part of his personal staff who regularly appeared with the Emperor during such affairs. Her name was Leruli Uni, and she was rumored to be a distant cousin of the Emperor. However, her exact ancestry was kept from public knowledge. According to Marshal Sleece, the two were lovers for many years, and was likely the reason for the royal parting. Over that same period, several attempts were made on her life, and at the time everyone suspected the Empress was behind it. Surprisingly, Marshal Sliss assured the Admiral such attempts had actually been made by moral extremists who did not like the breaking of the royal family. After several of these moral leaders disappeared, the attacks on Liruli ceased. She was now a regular fixture in the Imperial Palace. Tyler wondered how much she knew about the politics, USO 175, surrounding the Emperor. Did the Emperor confide in her? Either way, the Marshal confirmed she couldn't be turned, and that it was extremely dangerous to even try. The room fell silent as the announcer held the device to his mouth. Honored guests, the Imperial Palace is pleased you could come to this grand affair. In times of war, this may seem frivolous and excessive, but the palace believes continuity in the functions of the government is what keeps us going and defines us as a sovereign entity. The palace thanks you for helping us carry on this rich tradition established over 1,000 years ago. He paused, but everyone remained quiet. Once again, he raised the device. Honored guests, it is with great pleasure that I present to you your leader and the savior of Pulto, Emperor Hallan Yuso IV. The entire room filled with applause. The closest comparison was the Super Bowl Raul had invited he and Linda to in San Diego. Unlike the Super Bowl, this was pure applause. As Tyler clapped, he watched the cool and aloof Emperor. He noticed that Liruli was not mentioned in the introduction, but she didn't appear to mind. Her face was as stolid as the Emperor's, and although she held onto his arm, she stood slightly behind per protocol. The applause continued for over 5 minutes before dying down. At that point, the Emperor and his consort descended the stairs. This was the signal to begin seating. Tosia guided them across the dance floor towards the table set aside for their rank. As befitting the national hero, they were seated at a table with the Chancellor of the Supreme Council and Regent Sneerd of the Imperial Palace. The Chancellor had his wife and young daughter with him, while Regent Sneerd was accompanied by his lovely niece. Cordial introductions were made before everyone sat down. Tyler noticed the Regent looked uncomfortable, and although he couldn't be certain, he thought the Regent's niece was flirting with him. He was a little disturbed by it until he remembered he and Tusia's separation was not lost on the public. Within the circle of power, their separation was a known fact, and Tyler supposed many might easily believe that their current relationship was only political. Being diplomatic, Tusia ignored the girl's obvious advances on Tyler. According to the Admiral's memories, these were 176. Admiral's ghost common occurrences at such events. Tyler didn't relish the idea of fending off would-be suitors while trying to build political fences. It would be a long night. As the Emperor passed various tables on his way to the raised platform, he stopped at Tyler's table to say hello and welcome everyone to the ball. Tyler noted even the Emperor did not introduce his consort. She stood slightly behind as usual, not saying a word, and looking more than a little bored. Surrounding the imperial table, other tables were arranged in a semicircle around the raised platform. Tyler's was located at the center of this semicircle, flanked on either side by tables containing the regional governors of Pulto and their cabinet heads. The imperial platform and surrounding tables contained the bulk of Pulto's leadership. The Emperor took the middle seat at his table, overlooking the ballroom. His table was surrounded by smaller tables with the various heads of the imperial cabinet. Tyler himself could have invited someone from his staff, but the Marshal refused and urged him to let them work instead. Tyler agreed these functions were best left to the Admiral and his wife. The Regent looked longingly at the imperial table, no doubt thinking he should be sitting there. Unfortunately, tradition dictated the heads of each branch sat together. Tyler imagined this was designed to help bridge the chasm that often existed between them. Of course, according to the Admiral's knowledge of history, the design never worked. Nonetheless, they lived on protocol. Everyone settled in, and an army of palace staff served a generous and lengthy meal. As dictated by tradition, all tables except those in the Imperial semicircle were served first. Tyler wasn't necessarily hungry, but he wanted the food to divert Regent Sneerd's niece. She sat next to him and wouldn't stop talking. She was introduced as Greelin Sneerd, and she pointed out that she was the oldest of all of Uncle Anweer's nieces, and therefore was the first one asked to these affairs. Tyler also noted the regent cringed when she called him Uncle Anweer. According to Greelin, this was her 10th imperial ball, and she never tired of attending. By the time the servers had reached their table, Tyler had learned where Greelin lived, what schools she attended, where she worked, what type of men she liked. Older, Yuso 177 men with power, her musical preferences, and what the best clubs in Yuso were. Tyler was polite, but thankful when a server interrupted a stunning tale of how a friend of Greelin's had been lost in the war. Tyler supposed she must have thought an admiral never saw combat, and therefore didn't appreciate the gruesome reality. Thankfully, before she could finish the tale, Tusia came to the rescue. The admiral is well aware of the casualties inflicted in war, my dear. Perhaps you heard of his last battle and the injuries he incurred during the incident. She said it very coolly and ended with a curt smile. Tyler smiled inside. "Oh yeah, I guess I forgot," the girl responded. "Anyway, if you have time while in Yuso, I would be more than happy to escort you for a night on the town. I have many connections, and we could get into all of the very elite and exclusive clubs." Apparently, nothing would deter her from her mission. Again, it never occurred to her the national hero might not have problems getting into anything he wanted. Tyler gave Tusia a roll of his eyes, but she just smiled and returned to talking with the Chancellor. Tyler turned his attention to the food and tuned out Greelin. This didn't stop her from continuing. Tyler noticed Regent Sneerd was not paying attention to anything at their table and was busily scanning the crowd, no doubt analyzing everything and everyone he saw. Across the table, the Chancellor's daughter stared intently at everyone else. No doubt she was learning all she could about life in the Imperium. Tyler guessed she was about 10, but he felt certain she knew more than any 10-year-old he'd known. She hung on to every word Greelin uttered. Too bad, Tyler thought. Greelin was not a good role model. He was beginning to see why the Admiral spent little time in Yuso. It had been years since he had attended one of these events, and his memories held nothing but contempt for the politics conducted here. Number 178. Admiral's Ghost. At last, the formal dinner ended, and people mingled about the room. Tusia grabbed Tyler and said a curt goodbye to Greelin. Greelin returned the curt goodbye, and then boldly grabbed Tyler's hand, placing a slip of paper in it. She smiled longingly at Tyler while holding his hand. "My number in Yuso, in case you want to go out on the town. My uncle says you've spent little time here, so perhaps you would like to see more of this incredible city." She let go of his hand, but smiled with mischief in her eyes. Tyler pocketed the paper politely before saying goodbye. Tusia practically pulled him away from the table, and he felt good that she was jealous. They moved through the crowd before Tusia finally spoke. "Do you believe that girl? The nerve, as though I weren't even there. It is totally indicative of everyone in the palace, arrogant and self-serving." Tyler was surprised by her outburst, but realized she'd kept it quiet, so only he could hear. His feelings for Tusia welled up, and he desperately wished they could leave to be alone. He almost mentioned it to her until they stopped to talk with Titen Berry, a Supreme Council member Tusia's father was friends with for a long time. Tyler sighed. Back to business. The counselor was remarkably forthcoming, and Tyler was able to discern the council was split on their support of the Emperor. Although Tyler was still a favorite among many on the council, the sting of the failed offensive was hard for many to get past. Fed by imperial propaganda, many on the council questioned whether the failure was due to the Admiral or due to faulty military intelligence. In either case, the Admiral was ultimately responsible. Tyler thanked him for his support and lied to him. They would do everything within their power to find out what went wrong. It was a lie, because the Vice Admiral would ensure the military placed the blame only on the Admiral. Nonetheless, Tyler knew it would be a big mistake to appear other than completely in control. As the counselor explained his feelings about Vice Admiral Thiessen, an older gentleman interrupted their party. Tyler didn't recognize him, and judging from Tusia's expression, neither did she. He wore a very simple yet stylish suit that reeked of money. He was medium height, medium build, and not very distinguishable from most at the affair. Yuso 179. Tyler noticed one distinguishing characteristic that made him stand out loud and clear. His eyes held that same penetrating stare the Emperor's did. Tyler wondered if they were related. "Ah," the counselor exclaimed. "Here he is." He turned towards the stranger, as though they'd been waiting for him all along. Titan shook hands with the man, before turning towards Tyler. "Naylan and Tusia. May I introduce you to a good friend of mine, Naylan Hoos." Tusia extended her hand, and Naylan Hoos kissed it gently in response. "It is my pleasure, Lady Slay." He bowed slightly after releasing her hand. There was something Tyler didn't like about him, but he extended his hand anyway. "Naylan, is it?" Tyler asked. "A fine name, if ever was one." Naylan Hoos grabbed Tyler's hand, shaking it firmly. "I agree. It is an honor to share a name with our world's most famous hero." He sounded genuine, but the way he measured Tyler with his eyes made Tyler wary. Tyler turned his attention to the counselor as he explained who the man was. He was in the employ of the government himself at one time. Diplomatic Corps, wasn't it? Anyway, he now sits on the board of several manufacturing consortiums that supply the military. Tyler was surprised that he had never heard of someone who was so prominently involved in supplying the military. The Admiral's memories were replete with many such people, but not Naylan Hoos. Yes, I was in the diplomatic corps in my younger days, but I was never really cut out to be a bureaucrat, so I left for greener pastures. Tyler took the offensive. "I thought I was familiar with all our military suppliers. How is it we have never met, Naylan?" For a moment their eyes locked in an intense stare. As quickly as it came, it was gone, replaced with a soft, disarming smile. "Well, Admiral, I have often wondered the same thing. I spend a great deal of my time in Yuso, so perhaps that is why we have never met. I usually leave the military dealings with my underlings, while I attend to the political side of the business." His 180 Admiral's ghost response was smooth and convincing. "Without proper funding, the military couldn't buy any of our products. Let's just say I work closely with Councillor Berry and the Arms Procurement Committee." No arguing that. The Admiral had avoided Yuso as much as possible. It was also true, Councillor Berry was the head of the Arms Procurement Committee. It was one reason he made such a wonderful ally. Tyler responded, "Yes, I suppose that must be it. I am too often indisposed to spend time in Yuso, and I fear I may be the worst for it." "Nonsense," Nayland quipped. "What greater duty could there be than for saving our world? Your time has been well spent, my friend." He smiled, disarming Tyler, even as something briefly flickered in his eyes. "Indeed, Admiral," Counselor Beery chimed in. "No one faults your absence when your missions have been so noble. I'll tell you, though, you are more than a welcome addition to this city when you are here." "Yes, Nayland dear," Tusia added. "The capital city loves their hero." "Well," Nayland said, "I must run. So many more to meet tonight." He donned his smile and shook hands. "It was a true pleasure to meet you. I hope you enjoy your stay in our city." Tyler thanked him and watched as he disappeared into the crowd. "A most wonderful man to have on your side," the counselor said. "He was instrumental in the on-time delivery of the Kilt's cannon when it was delayed due to technical problems." "I remember that," Tyler said. "Its delivery was critical to our victory at the Battle of Pendor asteroid. He was responsible for that?" "Yes, he is remarkable, yet low-key. He may sit on the boards of those companies, but if you ask me, I suspect he runs them all. Close ties with the palace as well." The palace, Tyler thought. Maybe that's why I feel so wary. Perhaps that is where Nayland Hoos picked up his measuring stare. Tyler made a mental note to have the Marshal dig up information on this Nayland Hoos. If he had dealings with the USO 181 military, it shouldn't be hard to track down something from his contacts. After hours of mingling and dancing, which Tyler enjoyed most, they tracked down Tosia's parents deep in conversation with a palace official. Tyler didn't recognize the couple from the Admiral's memories, but Toosia did. "Hello, Mother, Father, Vice Secretary Geen," she nodded to the man. "And who is this lovely woman with you, Vice Secretary?" "Your wife." The man rewarded Toosia with a big, open smile. "Yes, it is my wife, Hilsa, finally come to visit the capital." The man stood up and kissed Tusia on both cheeks. "So good to see you again, Tusia. And I see you brought your husband with you as well." He turned to Tyler. "So good to finally meet you, Admiral. Your family has spoken fondly of you over the years. I feel like I know you." Tyler took the man's hand. "Well, thank you, Vice Secretary. I am pleased to see my family is in such fine company." Tyler smiled and reached out to kiss Hilsa's hand. She appeared timid, but let Tyler take her hand nonetheless. "You'll have to excuse my dear Hilsa. She is a wonderful woman, but she comes from the country. This city scares her with its size and population." Hilsa blushed, but remained silent. "Well now," Tusia started, "with so many politicians around, who can blame her?" She shook Hilsa's hand and gave her a warm and welcome smile. "Thank you, Tusia. Your point is well taken." The Vice Secretary signaled for them to join them. "Hello, Nayland. I hope all is well." Counselor Slay sat calmly, his wife Torian beside him. "All is well, Counselor? And yourself?" "Fine." Tyler turned towards Torian's cold stare. "Hello, Torian. So wonderful to see you again." Torian merely nodded her head to acknowledge Tyler. She turned quickly to Tusia. "Are you having a good time tonight, dear?" "Yes, Mother. Thank you." Tyler noticed Torian looked dubious, but let it go. Counselor Slay jumped in to get past the awkwardness. "Well, you look simply radiant tonight, dear. Glad you could come. The 182 Admiral's Ghost Vice Secretary was just filling us in on the latest crop reports from around the globe. Would you care to listen in?" No, the Vice Secretary replied. "No more boring crop reports. Let's talk about something less serious." With that, the Vice Secretary began asking Tyler about their winery and estates. He claimed to be fascinated by the wine-making process and indicated Hilsa's family often considered going into the business. Although she came from the country, she came from one of the largest farming cooperatives on the planet. The rest of the evening was uneventful, but both felt they had made some gains in re-establishing the networks loyal and supportive to the Admiral. He reported as much to Marshal Sliss before retiring for the evening. As an aside, he asked the Marshal to dig up what he could on Nayland Hoos. At the mention of Nayland, the Marshal had raised eyebrows, but dutifully jotted the name on his pad before heading off to assign resources to it. Tyler prepared for bed, but desperately wanted to join Tusia in hers. They had a wonderful evening, despite the nature of the event, and Tyler felt certain she had enjoyed dancing with him. Nonetheless, he held back. He didn't want to spoil it now. He undressed, noticing the slip of paper in his pocket from Greelan. He pulled it out to toss it away, but as he removed it, he noticed a second slip of paper tucked inside it. He opened both to see what else she had given him. The outer paper contained her name, address, and contact number, but the inner paper was type written in small letters. He opened it up all the way to read from the beginning. My apologies for the subterfuge, but one cannot be too careful these days, especially at an event within the palace. I was glad to finally meet you in person, as I have followed your career with great interest over the years. Unfortunately, your place in history is about to take a turn for the worse, unless you take immediate action. I know what you are trying to do in Yuso, and I have important information that will help you or hurt you, depending on how you use it. Please meet me at the Grand Anor Casino tomorrow night, but don't make it obvious. Ask Greelan to take you there. She would be more than delighted, I'm sure. However, bring your wife with you to eliminate any improprieties. Your future depends on this. Yuso 183. Please do not miss this opportunity to rejoin the game. I will contact you when you are in the casino. Tell no one, especially the Marshal. N.H. Tyler wasn't sure what to make of it. He recognized N.H. as having to be Nayland Hoos, but they had just met at the ball. Tyler couldn't figure out how Nayland had got the note into Tyler's pocket. They had only shook hands briefly. Perhaps it had been handed to him by Greelan, but that would put her in league with the man. All of it was suspicious, and the fact Nayland worked closely with the palace made it even more so. If the regent's niece was involved, that made it worse. Tyler knew where her loyalties lay. Tyler didn't trust him and felt vulnerable. He knew more about the Admiral than Tyler knew about him. He hoped Marshal Sliss would change that. He slipped the papers into his brief and put nightclothes on. He finished his ablutions, heading to bed worried about what new things tomorrow would bring. He felt like a fish out of water. Even the Admiral's memories didn't help, since he'd always avoided Pooltoe politics. It would cost him now, or rather, it would cost Tyler. He slid into bed and turned off the lights, staring at the ceiling as he thought about Nayland. Suddenly, there was movement at his door, and a slender silhouette entered the room. She wore nothing but a light, silky gown, and Tyler could make out curves beneath it in the pale light. "Nayland," she asked, "are you asleep yet?" Tyler's heart jumped. "No, I'm just thinking about the evening. What's wrong?" She held the door, apparently uncertain of what she intended. Tyler waited patiently. "Nothing is wrong," she began. "I just wanted to tell you that I had a wonderful evening, and that I am glad we are together." She paused, but held tightly to the door. "I want this to work, Nayland. I want us to be a family again." He heard a strain in her voice. Like before, he sensed strong feelings for the Admiral, but she still stung from the betrayals in his past. He felt guilty that he was only a reflection of the Admiral. An imposter. But he couldn't prevent that, whether from his own 184 admiral's ghost loss or from the strength of the admiral's memories. He loved Tosia and wanted their relationship to work. "I know," he said gently. "I also want us to be a family." Watching her silhouette, he wanted to pull her into bed, hold her in his arms, and make gentle love to her. Unfortunately, he would have to wait for her to make the move. "I'm glad, Naylin. I really am." He watched as she fidgeted in the doorway, obviously confused. Finally, she stood straight and began backing out the door. "Good night, Naylin. I love you," she said as she turned to walk back to her quarters. Tyler watched her go with regrets. "Good night, Tosia. I love you too." He laid awake for most of the night, while his thoughts turned from Naylin to Tosia over and over again. Tosia clearly loved the Admiral, but would she ever share that love physically? Tyler wasn't certain, but he was willing to wait. The next day, Tyler sat patiently through various speakers at the conference. The agenda included additional readiness reports, funding, troop strengths, and deployments. He watched as the Marshal made note of everything before sending it off to their staff for analysis and evaluation. At lunch, he and the Admiral's staff reconvened for briefings and order changes. Officer Slaas dutifully reported Officer Kier agreed to meet with them. The meeting was set for the day after tomorrow, in the Admiral's quarters. Tyler still didn't know how he would recruit the man, but at least he had agreed to meet with him. Tyler knew he would be surprised when only the Admiral attended the meeting, or then again. He may suspect it and hopes to gather information. Either way, they had to risk it. Tyler assumed that whatever was said would likely make it back to the Vice Admiral. Therefore, he had to play it cool. Already, his staff had prepared several scenarios for handling the supply crisis. A contact in the Office of Regional Affairs had provided information on empty portable storage systems that USO 185 could be launched immediately to handle the overload in production. Apparently, the storage systems were originally commissioned for a new mining facility that had been slated for construction the previous year. The bad news was the target asteroid was overrun by Kryldan forces, and the construction of the facility was cancelled. The Admiral's memories called up the incident, and Tyler recalled the vicious battle for that single rock. At the time, the loss had been substantial due to the rich ore that particular asteroid field contained. Now, however, it was a stroke of good luck. Based on recent intelligence, Kryldan never exploited the field after they captured it, so neither side benefited from the battle. A young officer finished reporting by stating the launch date was preliminarily set for the following week, assuming nothing jammed up the works. Everything would be done through private contracting, so the military bureaucrats couldn't stop the process if the Vice Admiral felt threatened. Tyler and the Marshal were delighted, although neither showed such emotions. Let them see what we can still do, Tyler thought. He knew the Vice Admiral would fume over their quick solution to a serious problem. The rest of the Supreme Military Command staff wouldn't be as surprised. The Admiral was known for his expert supply chain management. According to their sources, the Vice Admiral was approaching the problem through the existing military resources and was running into the typically slow processing of such a big problem. Tyler was happy they were delayed. Ironically, it was probably the first time the Admiral was happy about bureaucratic red tape. The Marshal concluded the report by indicating funding could be provided through the Admiral's discretionary account. The funds had originally been earmarked for flagship weapon systems upgrades, but since that had been destroyed, the money was available for other uses. Everything fell into place, and Tyler was impressed with the efficiency and speed of the Admiral's staff. It was no wonder the Admiral was a hero. Tyler noted the Admiral's memories indicated every staff member on the team had been approved by the Admiral himself. Tyler thought his selections superb. 186 Admiral's Ghost. Tyler made sure the Marshal set aside some of the funds for a night on the town for the staff. The Marshal nodded confirmation as he jotted down additional notes. The last of the reports on the previous day's work was the current analysis of the readiness and scheduling of the new equipment. According to their best estimates, the Vice Admiral's plan required cutting all corners, skewing their timeline by at least 30 to 40%. The Admiral's staff developed a more accurate projection of 7 to 8 months before most of the equipment could be properly fielded. This mirrored the estimate Tyler had derived based on the Admiral's prior experiences. According to the staff, they suspected the Vice Admiral was proposing to bypass systems testing in favor of pure field trials. While that appeared feasible on the surface, everyone knew systems testing was a critical aspect of the overall testing cycle. Most of the electronic and computer systems were new designs requiring proper testing before integrating them in space. Tyler called up an incident many years back where skimping on systems testing resulted in an attack cruiser incorrectly setting a course for the sun. The testers couldn't fix the problem and had eventually abandoned the ship, watching in horror as it flew into the star. Since that incident, the military enforced rigorous systems testing cycles, primarily due to the Admiral. The Vice Admiral was taking an enormous gamble. Finally, the discussions turned to the new information released during the morning session. Everyone agreed troop strength and deployments were not an issue in any proposed attack plan. They had plenty of supplies and carriers to transport troops where they were needed. The problem was they had no ships to transport them to. Until the new ships were deployed, the troops remained in training. This was to their advantage. Tyler felt confident they could recruit many on the Supreme Military Command staff with this information. It would be a hard sell, but wielding the Admiral's status, past experience, and knowledge of history could make it happen. Many admitted they were still loyal to the Admiral, but feared repercussions from the Palace and the Vice Admiral. Some even confided they felt threatened. USO 187. Let them use strong-arm tactics, Tyler thought. They'll never buy loyalty that way. He sensed Regent Sneerd's hand in play. They ended the meeting with orders to begin compiling all their information into a comprehensive report Tyler would deliver at the end of the conference. He knew they needed more time, but he felt pressured to sow the seeds of dissent sooner rather than later. As Tyler and Marshal Sliss walked back to the conference, the Marshal added additional information withheld from the luncheon meeting. Although nothing had been confirmed about the Skrilt, he noted that his informants released a report commissioned by the Palace Intelligence Office, warning of the possible use of Skrilt in weapons manufacturing. The report, never published to the military, outlined several theoretical uses for the substance. The report was so highly classified, its unauthorized release resulted in treason charges followed by execution. The Marshal was emphatic about that fact as he shared the information with Tyler. Apparently, the report was squashed by Regent Sneerd, and although it was rumored some resources were allocated to dig up more information, the priority was significantly lowered. The Marshal said they were trying to track down some of the scientists who had created the report, but it appeared their names had been faked. He finished by admitting that although they probably wouldn't get more information, the reaction at the palace was, by itself, rather interesting. Tyler agreed. If the palace was reacting to the Skrilt the same way they were, why did they squash the report? It didn't make any sense, unless they had additional intelligence not mentioned in the report. Maybe they'd already made their own discoveries concerning Skrilt, and wanted to keep it covert. Maybe that was the edge the Vice Admiral had in his back pocket? Tyler thought briefly about the note from Nayland. Maybe that was the information Nayland wanted to share. Perhaps he had access to the missing intelligence and was willing to share it with the Admiral. Why would he do that? Was he a big supporter of the Admiral's? Tyler couldn't figure out the motivations. But suddenly, the meeting at the casino seemed much more important than suspicious. The rest of the short walk back to the conference was used to deliver a short synopsis of Nayland Hoos. According to the Marshal's sources, Nayland sat on the board of various military 188 Admiral's Ghost equipment manufacturers, chairing several. As most of the companies were private, it was nearly impossible to uncover how much Nayland owned. His connections ran through the entire gamut of Pooltoe government, from the military, the Supreme Council, and right into the Imperial Palace. His previous government service was a bit of a mystery. Although he had served in the diplomatic corps, his records of stations and duties were sealed and inaccessible. They required an imperial order to release the documents, something the Marshal could not obtain. Like Councillor Berry, the Marshal surmised Nayland ran nearly all the companies for which he was on the board. It was rumored he had an intelligence background from his days in the diplomatic corps. The Marshal admitted he was unnerved by the fact that someone so influential had never crossed his path. He concluded he believed the man was both dangerous and powerful. Tyler thought about his meeting. An intelligence background made him dangerous, but he could prove to be a possible asset. With Nayland's connections, Tyler envisioned him having access to greater information than the Marshal could ever obtain. Marshal Sluis almost admitted as much. If he truly wanted to help the Admiral, then he could be a valuable ally. Tyler made up his mind. He would meet with Nayland and see how it played out. If they were truly out of the game, as Nayland insinuated, then they had to use whatever options were available to get back in. Tyler and the Marshal entered the conference room, ready for additional hours of speakers. At this point, the only thing interesting him was further details on the Vice Admiral's plan. Unfortunately, that wasn't scheduled until the following day. During the afternoon break, Tyler contacted Greelan to set up their date for that night. He'd arranged to pick her up early in the evening. She was extremely excited by the prospects until Tyler mentioned Tusia would join them. Despite this fly in the ointment, Greelan had agreed. Tyler was certain she was plotting to get her claws into him, even with Tusia around. USO 189. Tusia was a harder sell than Greelan, and Tyler winced at the look of despair that came over her when he mentioned the young woman. He hastily assured her he had no interests in Greelan, and confided she was only a cover for some business he needed to tend to. He didn't mention his meeting with Nayland, but only confirmed the evening wasn't just for pleasure. He quickly assured her he would explain everything afterwards. This consoled her, at least temporarily. She agreed to come, but Tyler suspected it was more from curiosity than to help him. Either way, she would be there to deflect Greelan's advances. Tusia currently sat next to him in the ground car as it sped across the city to pick up Greelan. They requested no escort despite the Marshal's protests. Tyler had finally calmed him down by ordering him to desist. He assured the Marshal it was inconceivable anyone would injure the planet's greatest hero. The Marshal replied he could count at least 3 off the top of his head. Tyler dismissed those concerns and was adamant no escort follow them. The Marshal conceded, but Tyler suspected covert escorts would be placed on them anyway. At least they wouldn't be public. Tyler glanced at Tuzia, admiring her calm demeanor. She was dressed in a semi-formal outfit, and once again, Tyler was taken by her subtle beauty. He knew the Admiral's memories had changed his attitude towards Poulto, but he didn't care. He wanted this woman, and convinced himself the feelings were his own. He gently took her hand. "I'm sorry to be so elusive, but this is an important thing I must do." "I know," she said plainly. "I could sense the urgency when you persuaded me to come." He didn't think she sounded persuaded. "I promised to tell you everything later." It sounded empty. He knew he would have to wait and see what Nayland had to say before he could confidently share it with Tuzia. He didn't even want to share it with the Marshal. "Fine," she replied. "I hope you don't mind that I invited a friend along. If you are going to be preoccupied this evening, the last thing I want is to spend it conversing with Greelin." He noted that when she said Greelin's name, it came out guttural and offensive. "Yes, who is it?" he asked. 190 Admiral's ghost." "Truden here," she said without emotion. The name triggered a response in the Admiral's memories. Tyler recalled the man as someone who'd always wanted to marry Tuzia. They had dated briefly in college before becoming friends. According to the Marshal's sources, Tuzia had been the one who broke it off. Tyler felt a twinge of jealousy, but realized the Admiral had carried on an affair for many years, even after Tuzia knew about it. What right did he have to be jealous? He smiled. "Good, then you won't be bored." He didn't pursue it further, and both remained silent the rest of the way to Greelin's. Tyler wasn't certain whether she had invited Truden to make the Admiral jealous, or whether she genuinely wanted a friend. The Marshal never confirmed whether she had an affair with Truden, but it didn't matter anyway. If she truly wanted a family, she might just be breaking it off with the old friend. Tyler tried putting it out of his mind. He was nervous enough about meeting Nayland and entertaining Greelin as their car pulled in front of a tall, extravagant apartment building. Tyler noted the building contained apartments on the upper floors with entertainment underneath. Several theaters, restaurants, and shops lined the lower floors, but private elevators would whisk the elite to their plush apartments overhead. Tyler had seen plenty of wealth as a substances dealer, but nothing as extravagant as this. Everyone wore expensive clothing and adorned themselves with sparkling jewelry. Although Tyler wore an expensive suit, he felt underdressed. This was the world they were fighting to save. It made him wonder how everyone outside the city lived. Greelin was waiting as they pulled up and waved an enthusiastic goodbye to a few people she'd been talking with. She ran towards their car as the driver held the door open. She stepped in, smiling broadly at Tyler, before delivering a curt hello to Tuzia. She took the seat across from them, an enormous grin on her face. Tyler broke the awkward silence. "Good evening, Greelin. It is very generous to show us around town." Greelin ignored Tuzia completely and poured charm all over the Admiral. "Yuso, 191. "My pleasure, Admiral," she said coyly. "I hope you will enjoy the evening. I have taken the privilege to book us at one of the best restaurants in town. I am good friends with the head chef, and it is useful to be part of the Imperial family." Tyler saw the immense pleasure she took in recounting her prestigious associations. He wondered why she thought that would impress the planet's hero. He figured it was habit at this point. "Great. I look forward to it," he said a bit too enthusiastically. "I would also like to stop at the Grand Anor Casino afterwards." "That old place," she exclaimed, a look of disgust on her face. "Whatever for?" Tyler remained calm. "I may meet a friend there for a drink, and he told me it was the best casino in town." "Well, it certainly is the oldest." Her face softened. "Who is this friend?" "School chum," he lied. In town for a convention or something. I thought I would see him again while he was back in the capital. It has been years since we saw each other. But she looked hurt, but quickly recovered with a sparkle in her eyes. Tyler thought she was already scheming for his imaginary friend. He had to admit, she was attractive, although in an aggressive and offensive sort of way. Very well, we can swing by the casino after dinner, but only if you promise to hit some clubs afterwards. Yes, that would be fine. He doubted Tusia, and he would like her clubs, but he wanted to appease her and keep up the charade. He watched Tusia practically cringing at the prospects. He owed her a great deal after this evening. They drove to the restaurant listening to Greelin recounting various tales of evenings on the town. As he barely listened, Tyler caught glimpses of the city through the window. He was amazed at the immensity. It was like Las Vegas and Tokyo rolled into one, except many times bigger. It took all his willpower to act as though it were a normal scene. He felt a thrill at being part of a great sci-fi epic, but the mood was lost in the sound of Greelin's voice. Although they traveled in a ground car, Tyler noticed the additional vehicles traveling through the skies overhead. He cringed when he thought of one of the vehicles falling to the ground below. Based on the crowd density in this part of town, a 192 Admiral's Ghost falling vehicle could take down hundreds. He stared up once again with feelings of claustrophobia. The car pulled up to the restaurant, and Greelin finally fell silent. Teosia squeezed his hand slightly as she pointed out the window to a small gathering of press waiting. Tyler supposed that if the place were really famous, then it was very likely the press showed up every night. Still, he couldn't help feeling someone had tipped them off. He glanced at Greelin and decided it wasn't inconceivable she had informed the press. After all, what good was it going on the town with the planet's most famous hero if no one saw it on television? "Oh no," Greelin exclaimed. "I was hoping the press would be covering somewhere else tonight. I hope you don't mind." She didn't sound sincere, and Tyler thought he heard excitement in her voice. It didn't matter. He was prepared to handle them. As the press noticed the car, they moved towards it. The driver held them back before opening the door. Tyler moved into the bright flashes and smiled widely. He turned to help Tusia, and she graciously accepted his right arm. He turned to assist Greelin, but she had already climbed out and grabbed his left arm, a girlish smile wide across her face. Tusia remained poised, so Tyler took her cue and escorted them towards the restaurant. As they drew close to the entrance, they were engulfed by reporters and cameramen. Everywhere in the crowd, microphones were thrust forward to capture every word. They made slow progress until receiving help from the doormen. The doormen cleared the press, and Tyler took the opportunity to give them their news. "Members of the press, we are glad you are here this evening." The press fell silent, with only sounds of their cameras and equipment, a dull background buzz. "My wife and I are out to enjoy the hospitality this great city has to offer." Tusia nodded in agreement. On my left, he nodded toward Greelin. "Is Greelin sneered, who has graciously offered to show us around the town this evening?" At the introduction, Greelin bowed slightly, never letting go of Tyler's arm. She was nearly giddy with delight. USO 193. "We look forward to a wonderful dinner followed by entertainment afterwards." With that, they turned and headed into the restaurant, the cries of questions falling deaf on their backs. As the doors closed behind them, the sound of the reporters faded inside the enormous foyer, trimmed with intricate gold leaf around the ceiling and walls. The floor was solid black, reflecting everything like a pool of dark liquid. In contrast, a small table sat at the far wall with a single person behind it. To the right of the table, A closed door provided the only break in the wall. Tyler assumed it was the entrance to the restaurant, but wasn't certain since its bland appearance made it look more like a coat room. They walked toward the table as the person scribbled on something hidden from their view. A small light barely illuminated the woman behind it. She was very pretty, elegantly dressed in a regal blue robe. They waited quietly as the young woman gave them a reassuring smile. The effect was breathtaking, and Tyler realized it hadn't been lost on Tusia or Greelin. Both smiled curtly, smug looks on their faces. "We are honored to have the great Admiral Oslu dining with us." Her voice was nearly angelic, with the lilting tones of Pulto. "We hope you will enjoy the fine selections our chef has prepared tonight." She bowed slightly, but it didn't steal from her beauty. Tyler realized he was mesmerized and tried to look at something else. "My name is Lysir, and I will be your host this evening. Think of me as your concierge. If there is anything you require, please let me know." Tyler's mind thought of several things she could provide, but quickly pulled his attention away from such thoughts. Her smile was so warm and inviting she could easily pull the attention of any man, even one with 2 beautiful women on his arms. Wow! Lysir handed them a small device which Greelin grabbed before Tyler could grasp it. Lysir ignored Greelin's discomfort and leveled Tyler a stunning smile. Tyler felt Tusia and Greelin tighten their grips as he returned the favor. "Before we seat you, Admiral, would you prefer the common room or something more private?" Admiral's ghost. For a moment he thought she was going to say intimate. With 2 women at his side, that would have been embarrassing. Apparently she meant private, as her demeanor didn't change. "Oh, the common room would be fine," he replied. "Thank you." She nodded and scribbled once more. As if on cue, the door behind the table opened, and another young woman ushered them in. Her name was Zirin, and she also promised to provide anything they needed. So far, this beat any restaurant Tyler could remember in Los Angeles. Back home, the service workers were aspiring actors or playwrights, so the service was often poor. Here it was downright decadent. He had to admit, he was getting accustomed to the Admiral's lifestyle. The small door led to a lift that whisked them to the upper floors. Tyler guessed they went at least 30 floors, but as the lift stopped, Zirin announced the 300th floor. Tyler tried not to look surprised by the mind-boggling speed they had traveled. The common room was not so common by Tyler's standards. The tables were spaced far apart, and as they passed from one to another, he sensed the hum of a field around them. The fields blocked conversations, and the silence within such a crowded room was eerie. They marched to a small alcove set against one of the windows. Zirin sat them before fiddling with several switches. The field was activated, and in response, the window became transparent. She had assured them no one could see through from the outside, and that no one would be able to overhear their conversations. Tyler was thinking, if this was the common room, then what did more private mean? The 3 of them sat on a plush semicircular couch surrounding the table. It was placed at an angle to the window, giving them a view of the city, as well as most of the dining room. Tyler was impressed by the view spectacular of the city. Tusia and Greelin sat on either side, Greelin too close and Tusia not close enough. Still, it was nice to have Tusia in such a spectacular setting. She was radiant, and Tyler quickly forgot the angelic hostess from below. "Isn't this fabulous?" Greelin exclaimed. "My friend is the best chef on Pulto." USO 195. Tyler had to admit, it was incredible. "Yes, these are wonderful accommodations. The view is especially beautiful. I have often seen it from space. But this vantage is truly remarkable." Tuzia smiled, but said nothing. Tyler noticed Greelan looked proud of herself to be eating with two of the more prominent people on the planet. She glanced around the dining room, searching for others, no doubt to mark the occasion. Tyler didn't care. He was waiting patiently and nervously for his meeting at the casino. He thought about Naylan and his motives. Why would an arms dealer want to give up the lucrative environment of war? Surely he had a lot to gain from a new offensive. But then again, if it worked, he might be out of work. That wasn't a shrewd business move. Tyler had to admit, the general feel of the planet was for ending the war, but they simply couldn't get past the bitterness and hostility from past deeds. To Tyler, peace seemed very far off. Tyler accessed the Admiral's memories and estimated the same situation was likely occurring on Krildon. He didn't believe anyone could live so long with war and not tire of the ceaseless sacrifices. Still, what motivated Naylan? He hoped the meeting would answer his questions. Greelan's voice cut through Tyler's reverie. "Admiral, did you hear me?" she said. Yes, he stumbled. No, I was lost in thought. Sorry, Naylan dear. Greelan was just telling us about the history of this restaurant, a truly fascinating story. Apparently her uncle is one of the co-founders. Tuzia squeezed Tyler's hand as she delivered this news. Tyler understood the gesture. It explained why they were here. Tyler looked around with more interest. He recognized a few faces in the dimly lit room and decided most were prominent people in Yuso, if not Pulto. He recognized a councilman dining across the room with several guests. Business interests, not doubt here to advocate their causes within the Supreme Council. Tyler realized this was where the real politics occurred. It was no wonder Regent Sneered was a co-founder. His ties to the Emperor would not doubt make the place popular, and although the entire facility was built to provide privacy, Tyler had no doubts Sneered had found ways to spy on the private conversations. 196 Admiral's Ghost. There was no end to the Emperor's reach, and Tyler made a mental note to tell Marshal Sliss about this place. However, he figured the Marshal already knew. Well, that is fascinating, Tyler agreed. Perhaps we'll run into your uncle while we are here? Maybe, she said nonchalantly, but he doesn't spend much time here. As if he had heard their conversation, Tyler spotted Regent Sneered enter the dining room and make his way towards their table. What timing! "Ah, we are in luck. I see your uncle now," Tyler said. He noticed Greelan brighten slightly and assumed she was ready to play up to her uncle yet again. He assumed Sneered probably recommended Greelan bring them here. "Yes, we are in luck. I almost never see him here," Greelan exclaimed. "I'll bet," Tyler thought. He looked at Tuzia, who remained cool and passive. He knew she had no love for Sneered and was probably thinking the same thing. "We are being monitored." The Regent entered their privacy ring and bowed. "Lady Slay and Admiral Oslu, you grace us with your presence." Tuzia bowed in response. "Regent." "Good evening, Regent. Quite a wonderful place you have here," Tyler said. "Your niece was just telling us about your interest in founding this establishment." "She did?" he replied. "Then she will have told you how wonderful the food is." Tyler had to hand it to him. The Regent was cool. Very cool. "Perhaps she also informed you we have the finest cellar in Yuso. Perhaps Pulto." He looked directly at Tyler. "We even stock a great deal of your own label, Admiral." A server suddenly appeared with a tray containing a bottle of wine and several fragile-looking glasses. "I hope you don't mind. I took the privilege of ordering one. Compliments of the house. In fact, everything is complimentary this evening. It is only fitting for our planet's most revered hero." Tyler thought he heard the last bit come out slightly scathing, but realized he may simply be projecting his own thoughts onto the Regent. Yuso 197 Tuzia jumped in quickly, saving Tyler from having to respond to the compliment. "Why, that is wonderful, Regent. We truly thank you." She was so smooth. Tyler even thought she was serious at first, but then remembered her true feelings. Regent sneered, shook off the thanks, and moved out of the way for the server. "Please enjoy your dinner. I look forward to seeing you again." With that, the Regent slipped away as quietly as he had come. Tyler looked at Greelin, who appeared hurt by the fact that her uncle didn't even acknowledge her presence. For a brief moment, Tyler almost felt sorry for her. The moment passed when she recognized someone across the room. She waved wildly and excused herself from the table. Tyler was glad for the break. "I'm sorry, Tuzia. I realize this is not exactly the ideal date." She remained calm. A slight smile on her face made her look confident and beautiful. In fact, Tyler thought the dim lighting and elegant surroundings made her even more radiant than usual. He felt a pull on his heart and wished they were both back at the estate, alone and in each other's arms. She quickly broke the moment. "Oh, please, Naylan, our host is being wonderful. I am enjoying this immensely. In fact, I am sure we will remember this night for a long time." Tyler saw through her sarcasm. She wanted to know what he was up to, but patiently waited to give him the time he needed. He owed her a lot and intended to pay it back. "Well, good," he lied. "So am I." He knew he sounded less convincing, but then he wasn't versed in the subterfuge and lying that was common in Yuso. He understood why the Admiral never spent time here. Greelin returned, breaking their awkward silence. Picking up where she left off, Greelin spent the rest of the meal recounting everything she knew about Yuso. Tyler had to admit, the food and drink were exceptional, even if the conversation wasn't. The ride to the Grand Anor Casino was filled with more of Greelin's adventures, and Tyler was nearing his boiling point. He 198. Admiral's ghost gritted his teeth and tried to remain calm despite the inane ramblings. It didn't help she nearly molested him. Tuzia remained placid, and her slight smile made it look as though she were enjoying the absurd scene. Tyler was relieved when their car finally stopped in front of the casino. The place was enormous, 20 stories and 3 city blocks if Greelin was to be believed. As Tyler looked out the window, he believed it. He noticed the usual gauntlet of reporters waiting outside, just as Greelin noticed them. "Oh dear," she exclaimed. "Those pesky reporters have found us here as well." Tyler saw that her face registered giddiness, even as her voice sounded displeased. "Don't worry," Tyler said. "We'll simply ignore them." They exited the car, Tuzia and Greelin once again grabbing each of Tyler's arms. The grip Greelin had on Tyler nearly caused pain. She walked erratically, smiling and posing for every camera, and Tyler had difficulty keeping them on course. She was getting real mileage out of the evening, and Tyler had no doubt she would recount the whole affair often for years to come. Tyler put on his best face as they pushed through the throng, ignoring questions thrown at them. It was a whole new batch of reporters, and they seemed even more aggressive. Apparently it was acceptable to be aggressive outside the casino. Tyler thought back to Los Angeles and the movie stars' complaints about paparazzi. He now understood their cries. Once inside, the press backed off as security guards eyed them intensely. Tyler was blown away by the elegance and decadence within the casino. It may have been old, but it sparkled like a brand new diamond. Tyler released Tuzia and Greelin, although Greelin resisted at first. He wasn't sure what to expect and wondered how Naylan would contact him. Well, he showed. Now it was Naylan's move. They descended the sweeping staircase that put them on the first floor of the casino. Tyler was amazed at how similar it was to casinos in Las Vegas. Gaming tables overflowed with players and onlookers alike. What looked like slot machines lit up the grand room in long aisles, stretching off into the distance. Even the sounds were reminiscent of Vegas USO 199. He felt the usual twinge of excitement and made a mental note to try some of the games before leaving. He was curious to see how many were similar to those on Earth. They were nearly to the floor when a voice called out from behind them. "Admiral, Admiral Oslu." Tyler turned to see a smartly dressed man descending the steps towards them. He wore a single suit of spectacular material in the colors of the casino, and on the right side of his chest, a small pin labeled him as Tinir Dien of Customer Services. Tyler waited. "Yes, what is it?" The man caught his breath, regaining his composure. "I'm sorry to bother you, Admiral, but you have an urgent call from Marshal Sliss." He stopped once more. "If you would follow me, I would be happy to show you to a private place to take the call." He bowed to the Admiral and gestured back up the stairs. "Okay," Tyler replied. "Tusia and Greelan, will you excuse me while I take the Marshal's call?" "Please, dear. I too have someone to catch up with. I will meet you all later." The thought irked Tyler, as he knew who she was going to meet. Greelan looked put out, but perked up quickly as if a light went off in her head. "Well, yes, no problem," she began. "I have some friends who said they would meet us here, so I'll track them down and meet up with you later. Let's meet for drinks on the 12th floor in a couple hours." "Splendid," Tyler said. "I'll meet you both there. Perhaps I'll get some gaming in beforehand, assuming the call isn't too critical." Tyler followed Tinir up the stairs and through a door marked "Casino Staff Only." It led to a small hallway, ending in a single door Tyler assumed was a lift. He was correct, but instead of going up as he assumed, the elevator went down, deep down. There was no indication of where they were, and Tyler lost count on what he thought was at least 15 floors underground. They finally stopped, and the door opened onto a dimly lit room with one table in the middle. Tinir signaled Tyler into the room, but stayed in the elevator. Tyler walked off as the lift doors closed, leaving him alone. 200 Admiral's Ghost. He wondered where the communication console was as he scanned the sparse room. The walls were slightly reddish in color, and the light of the room seemed to be emanating somewhere near the baseboards. It was more glow than light. He was confused when a door opened to his right, flooding the room with bright light. 2 figures entered, and the glow of the walls increased to a normal level. Tyler saw Naylan standing next to someone who appeared to be an assistant. At least the man reminded Tyler of his own staff, smartly dressed, walking behind in a deference, and carrying a small electronic pad that glowed dimly in the brightened room. "Admiral, so glad you could make it. I apologize for the subterfuge, but it was the best way to bring you here without raising suspicions." "So there is no call from Marshal Sliss?" Tyler asked. No, Naylan responded, shaking his head. "However, we are aware of his misgivings about me." Tyler didn't like the sound of that. Did they know everything? "You must be well informed," Tyler accused. "Indeed I am, Admiral, more than you can imagine. For instance, right now, the Emperor is entertaining a young woman, a staff aide, I believe, in one of his private quarters. They just finished 2 bottles of wine and are lazily lounging on a heavily cushioned sofa, talking about the lovemaking they will engage in shortly. Foreplay." He finished. Tyler was dubious. Spying inside the Emperor's private quarters? "Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Either way, it is treason," Tyler said. "Indeed it is, Admiral. Indeed it is. However, I assure you he is there as I have described." Tyler remained quiet, a look of doubt on his face. "Very well, Admiral. Let me demonstrate." Naylan signaled to his assistant, who did something on the pad. On the far wall, a large screen lit, partitioned into several smaller screens. Each one showed a different scene, and it reminded Tyler of his television room at Two-Land. However, instead of commercials and news shows, the pictures never changed, as if stationary. In some, people moved about or sat quietly, while others depicted empty rooms. Tyler was impressed. "What is it?" he asked. "USO 201. That is a small sample of the Imperial Palace." Nayland responded, "I can call up nearly every room if I desire." He gestured to the assistant again, and after some fiddling, the screen changed to a single view of a plush room, warmly lit, filled with soft pillows and furnishings. On one of the sofas, two people intimately embraced, touching each other heavily, talking quietly. Tyler noticed one of them looked a lot like the Emperor. Tyler was speechless. Nayland signaled to his assistant again, and the clear voice of the Emperor and his consort filled the room. It was as clear as if they sat across from the sofa. Nayland nodded his head, and this time the view changed entirely to a new room. Tyler was stunned as he saw Marshal Sliss and Officer Curran talking quietly at a small table. Curran, as usual, was engaged with his devices while listening to the Marshal. The Marshal was going through much of the data presented at the conference and had Curran double-checking the accuracy of certain figures. Tyler was doubly impressed and disturbed. Nayland signaled one last time, and the screen disappeared. "You see, Admiral, I am a very well-informed person. It is my primary mission to be well-informed." Nayland gestured to a chair, and they both sat down across from each other. "Okay, Nayland, I am surprised, concerned, and impressed. So why did you bring me here? To demonstrate treason?" "That?" Nayland swept his hand towards the now empty wall. "That was just a toy. One of many I possess to conduct my business. To my advantage, of course." "Of course," Tyler agreed. He was very nervous now that he realized he was sitting across from a very dangerous man. He should have heeded the Marshal's warning. Nayland sat back and looked at Tyler, assessing him with his eyes. Nayland signaled to his assistant, and almost an instant later, the door opened with a young woman carrying a tray of 2 glasses and a bottle of liquid Tyler didn't recognize. She set it down in front of Nayland and filled the 2 glasses from the bottle. She brought one over to Tyler. She quietly set it down before disappearing through the door as silently as she had came. 202 Admiral's Ghost. Nayland picked up his glass and signaled Tyler to do the same. Tyler picked it up hesitantly and watched carefully as Nayland took a small sip before putting it down. "Don't worry, Admiral. I have no intentions of harming you. Go on, taste it. I think you will agree it is quite remarkable and exotic." Tyler lifted his glass and sniffed lightly before putting it to his lips. The smell was like vanilla, but the flavor slightly more bitter, with a fruity aftertaste. Tyler had to admit, it was good and exotic. That, my friend, is Krilden Sar's berry wine. A true delicacy, and very rare, Nayland said proudly. Tyler searched the Admiral's memories for a reference, and found that the Admiral's parents drank it on a regular basis while living on Krilden. Although the Admiral had never tried it, he remembered his father once remarked it was the nectar of the gods, and nothing in the family wine production came close. Tyler had to admit, he saw the attraction. The aftertaste kept changing slightly, as though several different fruits were part of the drink. At the moment, he thought he tasted banana. As though reading Tyler's mind, Nayland spoke. "Like me, your father and mother used to love this drink." "You knew my parents?" Tyler asked, surprised. "Oh yes, quite well, actually." Tyler could find no memory of this person, and it seemed out of character for the Admiral's parents to be affiliated with someone so dangerous. Again, Nayland read his mind. Of course, I knew them a long time ago when I was a very different person, as we all were before the war. He finished and took another sip of his drink, staring at Tyler with disturbingly penetrating eyes. "When did you know my parents?" Tyler asked. "On Krildon," Nayland said placidly. The answer surprised Tyler. He had expected him to say something else, something closer to Pulto. "Really?" Tyler asked. "And what were you doing on Krildon?" "I worked for your father, of course, as part of the Imperial Intelligence Agency, or IYA as we called it." "I don't think so. My father was not in intelligence. He worked for the diplomatic corps as ambassador to Krildon. My father respected Krildon and would never have betrayed them that way." "USO 203. Tyler said it, but wasn't convinced himself. Had the Admiral been so naive? Tyler remembered growing up seeing many reports about foreign ambassadors being expelled from the United States for spying. Maybe the Admiral's father had spied as well. That may be why he was arrested. Nayland read his mind again, and it was beginning to irk Tyler. "The Emperor used your father for years, and when your father stood up for what he believed in, the Emperor betrayed him to Krildon, which caused his immediate arrest. Surely you are not so naive to believe your father was only there as a diplomat?" He took another sip. "Your father ran the IIA on Krildon all those years, and he never told you." Tyler saw the logic, and it explained a lot of strange things the Admiral remembered about growing up on Krildon. But still, he could find no memory of this man. No, he never mentioned it. No matter, I am sure he had his reasons. As you no doubt have realized, I never met you since I was a very deep agent at that time. It was policy not to openly associate ourselves outside of work. I was a businessman at that time, although a full agent for the Emperor. I made a lot of acquaintances and developed a rather extensive network. Of course, after the war started, my network was difficult to maintain, but I've managed. He signaled to Tyler with his glass, as if to say, "How do you think I got this?" "So you have agents on Krildon?" Tyler asked with concern. Despite his ties to the Admiral's parents, this man was not trustworthy. "Of course. As I said, I am well informed. Does the Emperor know?" Tyler waited, assuming the man was really working for the Imperial Palace. He smelled a trap. "Does he know?" Nayland smiled. "My dear friend, he encourages it." So this was a trap. He was working for the Imperial Palace, a spy for the Emperor. He was going to discredit the Admiral in some way, removing him from prominence, and thereby allowing the Emperor and Vice Admiral Thiessen to go forward with their reckless plan. Well, if Tyler could help it, he wasn't going to let that happen. "So, you work for the Emperor?" he asked. "For him, as well as others?" "Others?" Tyler asked. "What others?" 204 Admiral's ghost. "For now, let's just say they are people who share the same goals as I do." "Are these the same goals as the Emperor and Thiessen?" Tyler retorted. Nayland smiled and looked more closely at Tyler. Tyler held his gaze, refusing to back down, no matter how dangerous he was. "You are not as shrewd as I thought, Admiral. A brilliant commander, no doubt, but not shrewd at politics or intelligence." He took another sip before continuing. "That explains your avoidance of USO and your extended stays off-planet. It is no wonder you rely so heavily on the Marshal." Tyler remained quiet, absorbing the condescending words. This man knew everything about the Admiral, and Tyler was unnerved by it. He knew he was out of his league, even more so than when they first arrived. What had he gotten himself into, and how could he get himself out? "I can help." Tyler froze as the voice inside found its way into his consciousness. His growing fear had lowered the mental barriers, and he could sense the alien presence trying to exploit it. He forced it back with a stern warning. "I don't need your help." The inner voice fell silent, and Tyler hoped the internal exchange had not been visible to Nayland. He went on the attack. "Why am I here, Nayland?" he demanded. "What is it you want with me?" Nayland smiled with disarming charm. "I want you to join me and help bring an end to this senseless war." Tyler was caught off guard by comment. Wasn't this man an arms dealer? Why would he want to end the war? And why would I join you? Not me personally, but my cause and the others I mentioned. I think they could convince you, if given the opportunity. Tyler couldn't read the man. What was his motive? He couldn't see it, at least not now. He didn't think Nayland was such a giving man.